Hello everyone, and welcome back to History of China. This is the second part of my Empress Dowager Cixi video, so I strongly recommend watching part 1 if you haven't already, to catch up with the timeline. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy. (1881) China is officially ruled by a 9-year-old, puppet Emperor Guangxu. Since one of the co-regents of the child emperor, Empress Dowager Ci'an, just unexpectedly died, Empress Dowager Cixi has assumed absolute power as a leader of the Qing dynasty. Since the empire's technological backwardness has been exposed in the costly Opium Wars, China is undergoing modernization efforts. Through the guidance of enlightened reformist officials, the navy and industry are continuously developing. Although initially a key figure in the self-strengthening movement, Empress Dowager Cixi is slowly becoming suspicious of the westernization of the Celestial Empire. With her iron grip rule in the past 20 years, Empress Dowager Cixi had made herself several enemies within the nobility and high-ranking officials. Furthermore, she now officially found herself alone at the head of the empire. For the moment, her rivals remained powerless, but Cixi knew that she had to consolidate her authority, made vulnerable by Ci'an's passing. An opportunity for a purge came shortly after. In 1884, as the French expanded their influence in Indochina, they moved into the Tonkin region, a domain traditionally under Chinese suzerainty. The French advance in the area was not well received by the Qing dynasty's imperial court. Tensions sparked, and eventually, a Sino-French war broke out. Initially, the imperial court and local officials were confident in this new conflict. China could put to the test its newly modernized forces, and with superior manpower, this could be an occasion to take back control. However, events would not unfold as expected. Still overall inferior in technology, the Qing dynasty's forces were gradually pushed out of Tonkin, allowing the French to assert their domination on the territory. Peace was finally signed in 1885, and although the Qing dynasty had lost the war, the defeat was nowhere near as crushing as in the Opium Wars. Using the pretext of the botched Sino-French War, Cixi could now act on her political schemes. Yixin, the Prince Gong, a previous ally turned rival, was still at the head of the Grand Council, the central institution of the Qing dynasty. Subsequently, Cixi accused Yixin of being incompetent and stripped him of all his positions. His dismissal left vacant posts at the head of the Grand Council and Zhongli Yamen, which essentially was a ministry for foreign affairs. To consolidate her authority, the Empress Dowager then appointed several officials loyal to her to fill in the various posts. They included Yi Xuan, Prince Chun, the father of the child Emperor Guangxu, Yi Guang, Prince Qing, and Shi Duo, Prince Li. In this first period of ruling alone, the Empress Dowager had firmly established herself. Meanwhile, teenage Emperor Guangxu was slowly growing up. Exterior affairs now settled, the Empress Dowager turned her attention to the Forbidden City. Back in 1869, now deposed Yixin, Prince Gong, had approved of the execution of An Dahai, chief eunuch loyal to the Empress Dowager. Consequently, Cixi's network of eunuchs to oversee all activities and enforce policies within the Forbidden City had fallen apart. She now reorganized a new network under Li Lianying, a eunuch who had aided Cixi during her initial coup in 1861, thus gaining her favors. He was made the new chief eunuch and would stay close to her until death. Finally, for advice on external affairs, she relied on statesman Li Hongzhang, a loyalist yet advocator of modernization, who had proven his worth several times in the past as a talented official. Cixi understood her position as regent was only temporary. In a few years, Emperor Guangxu would legally come of age and assume imperial power, forcing Cixi to step down. Preparing for her retirement from power and subsequent leaving of the Forbidden City, she ordered imperial architects to create a lavish and fabulous new palace complex. Symbolically, the magnificent residence would be erected on the ruins of the Gardens of Clear Ripples, part of the old summer palace, previous complex destroyed during the Second Opium War. Construction of this new summer palace began in 1884 in a massive project which would cost the treasury millions of taels of silver, severely draining the nation's reserves. Soon later, officials eagerly prepared for a massive change. In 1887, Emperor Guangxu had legally reached majority and could begin ruling on his own. Cixi could have stepped down from power then, comfortably retiring and letting an enthusiastic and reformist ruler take charge of the Qing dynasty. History would however not see it this way. Whether it was out of genuine loyalty or corrupt opportunity, high-ranking officials loyal to Cixi, such as Yixuan, Prince Chun, implored her to keep ruling for many more years. Noticing the overall submission of the main officials, Cixi subsequently remained in power. During the following months, the Empress Dowager claimed that she would slowly introduce Guangxu to state affairs. Furthermore, an opportunity to plant a perfect spy to maintain her influence over Guangxu even after he assumed power arose. As a yet unmarried emperor coming of age, Guangxu would soon have to select concubines as well as an empress to constitute his imperial harem. Prepared not to let him choose his own wife and concubines, Cixi took charge of the wedding. Contrarily to previous Emperor Tongzhi's selection ceremony, where late co-regent Tz'an had eventually influenced the choice of the empress, much against Cixi's wishes, there was this time no one to challenge her choices. In 1889, year of the imperial wedding, the Empress Dowager appointed her own niece as Guangxu's empress. 2 additional girls, who were sisters, were appointed by Cixi as consorts Jin and Zhen. With the emperor now married to her niece, the Empress Dowager conceded to officially retire and let Emperor Guangxu assume full imperial power 5 days later. Cixi moved out of the Forbidden City to the recently restored New Summer Palace, the construction of which had crippled the Qing dynasty's coffers. Her onerous retirement allowance and the heavy cost of maintenance funds for the New Summer Palace would remain a constant burden on the Qing treasury. Reportedly, an interesting activity that Cixi maintained in her retirement was the organization of a ceremonious inspection of the Qing dynasty's troops once every year. Successfully brought up by his tutors, Emperor Guangxu wished to restore China to a powerful position. However, apart from the ambitious reformists, most officials did not truly believe in him. Opposed to additional changes, conservatives actually remained close to his retired aunt. Seeking to rise in ranks, several of them would also donate large sums or make gifts to her. It soon became clear that the Empress Dowager, although officially retired, still held huge authority and influence. She was often consulted by the Grand Council, top officials, and Guangxu himself on major decisions. The young emperor was furthermore forced to pay filial visits to his aunt regularly. As her 60th birthday came up in late 1894, Cixi planned to organize a lavish public celebration in the streets of Beijing, inspired by those of previous Empresses Dowager of the High Qing era. However, very low public funds, the outbreak of the First Sino-Japanese War, and soon later disastrous reports of defeat after defeat in the conflict, forced her to reduce the celebration to a much smaller event within the Forbidden City. This probably deeply frustrated her. Fighting against the Empire of Japan, a nation that had brilliantly modernized into an industrial power, proved disastrous. China was crushed in the war and lost Taiwan and sovereignty over Korea, as well as millions of taels of silver in war reparations. Emperor Guangxu, judging past reforms had not been enough, launched the groundbreaking 100 Days Reforms that I've already explained in my Guangxu video, an unprecedented plan of modernization and radical changes in the imperial system. Profoundly frustrated by all these events, Empress Dowager Cixi decided it was time to step back onto the political scene. However, both her previous accesses to power relied on the opportunity given by the death of an emperor. This time, Emperor Guangxu was alive and well. Nonetheless, Cixi was determined to take back control of the Qing dynasty. In an event known as the Wushu coup, the Empress Dowager tasked her champion, General Ronglu, with arresting Emperor Guangxu. After secretly requesting help, Ronglu received the support of General Dong Fuxiang and his Gansu Brave, a seasoned Muslim army that had defeated the Donggan Revolt several years earlier, as well as the support of General Yuan Shikai, wrongly trusted by the reformists, who controlled the Beiyang army, a fully modernized and drilled force, inspired by Western practices. At dawn on the 21st of September 1898, Ronglu deployed his forces around the Forbidden City, took control of the area, and seized helpless Emperor Guangxu. As Guangxu was put under house arrest, Empress Dowager Cixi triumphantly returned to the Forbidden City in what was her third accession to power. Immediately, she officially resumed her ruling over all of the empire. Over the next few days, all of the reforms made by Emperor Guangxu were cancelled, and the significant reformist officials were purged from government. Emperor Guangxu was once more made a puppet, and Cixi designated 14-year-old Pu Jun, son of hardline conservative official Tz'u, Prince Duan, as the heir to the throne. Finally, to thank Yuan Shikai for his crucial role, Cixi appointed him as governor of Shandong. However, opposition to the westernization of the country and to the Qing dynasty within the Han Chinese population had grown tremendously in the last years. China was about to fall back into civil unrest. The Boxer Rebellion broke out in 1899 as bands of Han Chinese nationalist insurgents rose up in arms to destroy every kind of foreign influence from China, including the Manchurian elite of the Qing dynasty. The imperial government, once more at war, was unsure on what to do next. Tz'u, Prince Duan, father to the heir to the throne, shared the Boxers' xenophobic sentiment against Westerners and encouraged their siege of the legation's quarter of Beijing, location of many foreign embassies to the Qing Empire. This event would trigger a foreign allied expedition to China to relieve the besieged legation's quarter. Convinced the Qing forces should fight alongside the Boxers, Tz'u further organized a meeting between Cixi and Cao Futian, a prominent Boxer leader, hoping to establish an alliance to drive out any foreign influence. In the end, his efforts paid off, and Empress Dowager Cixi was convinced. As a result, she published an official decree ordering all armies to go to war against the foreigners. Meanwhile, the foreign powers had assembled into the Eight-Nation Alliance, aiming to march on Beijing to relieve the besieged legation's quarter. The Qing Empire was officially at war against the British Empire, United States of America, French Republic, Russian Empire, Japanese Empire, Kingdom of Italy, Austro-Hungarian Empire, and German Empire, which composed the Eight-Nation Alliance, as well as the Netherlands, Spain and Belgium. The order to fight was distributed throughout the empire. To the court's surprise, however, it was not obeyed everywhere. For the first time since the Manchu conquest of China, a group of prominent Han Chinese officials, including Li Hongzhang in Yangguang and Yuan Shikai in Shandong, refused to obey the court's orders. Realizing the absurdity of going to war against 11 of the most powerful nations of the world, they instead formed the Mutual Protection of Southeast China, an organization aiming to suppress the Boxers in the region they controlled. General Ronglu himself, although not part of this organization and still loyal to Cixi, hindered Boxer activities in his sphere of influence. The allied Qing and Boxer forces successfully repelled the initial foreign relief expedition, which was forced to retreat. However, they were promptly overwhelmed when overseas reinforcements of the Eight-Nation Alliance arrived. The foreign force subsequently marched on Beijing to rescue the legation's quarter. This event, reminiscent of the disastrous Second Opium War, convinced Empress Dowager Cixi to relocate the imperial court to safety in the city of Ci'an. Aiming to keep control over the state despite the situation, she took helpless puppet Emperor Guangxu with her to prevent him from being reinstated with the help of the Eight-Nation Alliance, and the court fled to the southwest. Unsurprisingly, the Boxers and Qing forces were crushed as the dynasty was once again brought down to its knees. To settle the disastrous conflict, the Boxer Protocol was signed in Beijing in 1901 by the foreign powers on one side and Qing statesman Li Hongzhang on the other. Drained from these events, the official died shortly after. Peace had been brought back, but the empire was in a pitiful state. To fill in the posts left vacant after Li Hongzhang's death, namely the viceroyalty of Zhili and ministry of Beiyang, Cixi summoned General Yuan Shikai. The Empress Dowager also disgraced Tz'u, Prince Duan, as he had encouraged this conflict. His son, Pu Jun, was stripped of his position of heir to the throne, and he and his family were sent in exile in Xinjiang province. The imperial court finally moved back to the Forbidden City in early 1902. Immediately, Cixi resumed her central position in the Forbidden City, reaffirming the status of puppet of Emperor Guangxu. Although the Boxer Rebellion had been put to an end, the Qing dynasty had become overwhelmingly unpopular in the eyes of its subjects. Secret societies and undercover revolutionary groups began to emerge both in China and abroad, such as Dr. Sun Yat-sen's Tongmenghui. Realizing that change was inevitable for the survival of the dynasty, the Empress Dowager conceded to implement reforms after all. These would be known as the New Policies. To organize and oversee the gradual changes, a new office managed by prominent officials was established. On the international level, Empress Dowager Cixi changed attitude. Trying to seduce the West rather than fight it, she began inviting the wives of foreign diplomats for tea and garden parties in the Forbidden City. Soon later, Cixi learnt of an unusual daughter of a Chinese nobleman. This young girl, named undoubtably, also known as Elizabeth Antoinette White, had an American maternal grandfather and had just returned to Beijing after following education in the West. As she could speak both French and English fluently, Cixi took her in her entourage in the Forbidden City, even appointing her as her main palace maid. Her image in the West now improving, the Empress Dowager turned her attention to promote it within her own nation. A vast number of photographs of herself in various poses were taken by undoubtably's brother, who had studied photography in France. They were then sold on the streets of cities throughout China. Still ruling the country with an iron grip rule, Cixi now refused to get the nation involved in any further wars and conflicts. In 1903, the British led an expedition into Tibet, a protectorate of the Qing dynasty, expanding their influence from India. The imperial court did not react. The following year, when the Russo-Japanese War broke out in Manchuria, the original territory of the Qing dynasty, the Celestial Empire remained neutral in the conflict. Bands of independent Chinese mercenaries did however take part in the fight, serving on both sides. By the end of the war in 1905, the local Chinese population had however greatly suffered, counting about 20,000 casualties, some of which at the hands of both the Japanese and Russians. As the unexpected victor of the conflict, Japan gained great influence in Manchuria, increasing the frustration and resentment of the Chinese population. In 1905 and 1906, in the prospect of modernizing the country further as part of the New Policies, the Qing government commissioned several ambassadors and imperial princes to go on tours abroad in both the West and Japan to study their national administration and laws. As they returned, new reforms on an unprecedented scale were implemented in China. Many archaic imperial institutions were abolished, modernized, or replaced. The Ministry of Revenue became Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of War became Ministry of the Army. New institutions were also founded, such as the Ministries of the Interior and of Post and Communications. The Great Qing Legal Code was profoundly modified, and tortures such as Lynch, the death by 1,000 cuts, were officially abolished. Most significantly, the over a millennium-old traditional imperial examination system based on Confucian morals was abolished. An event would however mark yet another nail in the coffin of the Qing dynasty. To the shock of many, Emperor Guangxu was poisoned and died on the 14th of November 1908 at the age of 37. He was quite possibly murdered by the Empress Dowager herself, as she then designated 3-year-old Pu Yi, her grandnephew, as the new emperor. Cixi's potential plans to resume her official position as regent of the empire were however cut short. She died the following day, at nearly 73 years old, of natural causes. Her 47-year-long iron grip rule over the Celestial Empire was over. A massive public funeral procession was organized for the Empress Dowager from the streets of Beijing towards the eastern Qing tombs. The extraordinary event was attended by foreign diplomats too. As the tombs were located over 100 kilometers away from the capital, it took several days for the procession to arrive. In addition, many diverse funeral activities took place, such as the burning of a giant 72 meters long ship maneuvered by paper effigies of servants. Some of these activities kept taking place until up to 12 months after Cixi's actual death. The Empress Dowager's luxurious mausoleum in the eastern Qing tombs was lavishly ornated and gilded. In total, it contained over 20,000 pearls, 200 jades, and 80 rubies, as well as many expensive vases and golden statues. In an ironic turn of events, Cixi would not rest peacefully for eternity. 20 years after her burial in 1928, amidst the chaotic times of the warlord era, Cixi's mausoleum would be utterly looted and her corpse stripped of jewels and gems and thrown on the ground. This grave-robbing operation was orchestrated by bandit warlord Sun Dianying and his men. Empress Dowager Cixi lived for 72 years. During more than half of her life, she alternately officially and unofficially controlled China with an iron fist. Although she first allowed the country to modernize, saving it from imminent collapse, her lack of faith in her nephew Emperor Guangxu's reforms would be the fatal blow for the Qing dynasty. To this day, the Empress Dowager's image in the world remains controversial, some considering her a positive element of China's history, while others a tragedy. In 1908, she left the crumbling Qing dynasty in the hands of 3-year-old Pu Yi. The last emperor of China would be rocked by all the groundbreaking events of the early and mid-20th century China, and would successively embrace modernity in the Western world, monarchy, and eventually communism. Thank you for watching my video, I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or requests, feel free to leave them in the comment section below.